original email.
Okay, Facebook said they're ready when we're ready.
Okay, so if you're all ready, I think I'm ready.
Is the timer set to 59:59?
Yes, it is.
Okay, hit the silver switch that turns the timer on. Is the light on?
Yes, it is.
Put the clapper in front of your face. When you hit the clapper, you're on the air.
This is like a movie.
This
It's like making a film. Yes.
Okay. This is welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center and the Interfaith Peace Network. Talking Peace is being recorded here, produced by Richard Wicca at the Home of the Future. So thank you, Richard, and Think Twice Radio. We're excited to have an important topic, a very emotional topic, and a very timely topic today, and that is Afghanistan. And we have two special guests to help us, and especially I want to just start right off with Dr. Zahir Wahab, whose reputation precedes him, who is Afghan, who is an educator, analyst really, and truth teller about what's going on in Afghanistan. So, Dr. Zahir, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ross. Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Marie, and thank you, everybody else, for organizing this. And my thanks to the people who are viewing this and listening to it.
And I want to introduce Marie Schuster. Marie is the co-chair of the Resist Militarism Taskforce of the Western New York Peace Center. So, and actually, until recently, the board chair at the Western New York Peace Center, who's a longtime peace activist and, well, not too long. You're young enough to not make it very long. But anyway, very committed, very committed. So welcome, Marie.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation with Dr. Zahir. I really am glad to be here.
Well, of course, Zahir is such an expert. So I think before we get into talking about Afghanistan, one of the things we've started doing is talking about the values that we want to bring into the conversation and into the issue. So I would invite each of you to just think about what do you think are the values that are sort of driving your vision of what's going on or what needs to go on. What are the critical values in this, in Afghanistan? So,
Would you like me to respond?
Yes, I would. Yes, please.
Well, from my childhood, I would be a little autobiographical. My father never spent a day in formal schools, but he was very highly educated. He was fluent in Pashto, Farsi, and in Arabic. He went to Hajj, the pilgrimage. Mm-hmm. He read all the time, whatever he could find. He was a school teacher. He was also an imam at the local mosque. And he was sort of the wise man of the community. My mother was completely illiterate because 80% of the women in Afghanistan, she had no opportunity to become literate. But I knew, and my father sort of made it known that there are certain principles in life, there are certain values, and that we were to lead certain kinds of lives. So I believe, from what I have learned from my parents, and then, of course, subsequently through my own education, American professors,
right.
writers, I'm a great fan of Noam Chomsky, of Cornel West, Bell Hooks, Edward Said, Eduardo Galeano. I always spend most of my time reading. When I talk to my wife, Tamina, we talk about what's important in life, and we try to be as consistent as we can be. So I've always believed in the notion of justice, fairness, compassion, empathy, sympathy, equity, freedom, personal, social, economic, political freedom, truth, simplicity, honoring, the elders, the wise people, honoring the words, written words, whether they come from any kind of religion, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever. So these are the kind of things that, sort of guide my life. And the 50 years that I spent teaching, and I should say, I'm not just an Afghan, but I consider myself as an Afghan and an American. Right. I live in Portland, Oregon now. I've spent more time in this country than, in Afghanistan. But I was in Afghanistan until October 2 years ago. I spent 7 years teaching at the American University of Afghanistan for 7 years and didn't leave the country. So in the last 20 years, of course, I've gone back many, many times, serving as the advisor to the Ministry of Higher Education, who was also an Afghan-American, Dr. Faiz. In my teachings, in my assignments, in my tests and exams, homework, etc., I try to get my students, to uphold humane, decent, modest values of freedom, justice, equity, and doing good. So these are really the values that I bring to my own life, and also I have tried to impart these values to my students and my colleagues here in Portland, Oregon, but also in Afghanistan.
Well, I think I can say that you clearly do from having heard you speak, and even as you're telling your story, but in other ways and times. So thank you so much for all of those. And I would just ask Marie, are there any values that you want to mention, or just that
that's a tough list to follow, but something that, especially in regards to Afghanistan, has been on my mind is transparency. Something that we lacked in the beginning, and for 20 years, until the Afghanistan papers, was that 2019 that those were released. And we're still looking for that kind of accountability, transparency, and justice. Right.
Well, actually, as you're speaking, you're both reminding me so many wonderful and important values that you're mentioning, and so it makes me think of really. Makes me want to quote two people. One, Dr. King, who talked about unarmed truth and unconditional love.
Yes.
So, which is very much embodied in all the things that you said. That truth is that transparency and the accountability, and love is that empathy and that concern for others. Or Cornell West, who that we had Cornell West for our annual dinner last year. So we're very, very proud of that at the Western New York Peace Center. But he talks about moral integrity and universal solidarity.
Yes.
And those are two, again, they're just sort of, all of these things, they're sort of like milk and its whiteness. They're intimately connected and part of each other. So I've loved to go on from that. And actually, Marie, as you started to talk about it, and Zahir, even in your beginning opening, when we think about Afghanistan, it's hard to know really whether to start with now or to start with how we got there. So I think we can sort of roll it up together. And let me ask you to sort of, if you would, tell us your view of how we got there and where we are now.
Well, it's a great tragedy. We all know that this is the 20th anniversary of, I would say, two major crimes. I think the millennium began with two major crimes. One was the crime of 9/11, when 19 hijackers, all Arab, none of them Afghan, attacked the United States and killed a lot of people. Of course, that's very controversial. We all know as to who knew what, who did or didn't do what, between the FBI, the CIA, the intelligence. But that was a major crime. And then the second crime was when the United States of America and its allies, initially Britain, attacked and invaded and then occupied Afghanistan in October of 2001. Because Afghanistan, I have to keep saying this, Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. The 19 hijackers, the planning, the training of the flying, the execution, etc., had nothing to do with the Afghan people, especially the current Afghans, where 75% of them are under 25. A lot of these people were not even born then or were very little. So, but the United States went ahead. And I would say also a lot of people may not know that the decision to invade Afghanistan was made prior to September 9/11. That decision was made in the summer of 2001 and had nothing to do with 9/11. Just like the Iraq decision. John Pilger has documented this. Noam Chomsky speaks about this. A lot of other people we all know now.
Sure.
So, but the United States went ahead, and attacked and occupied Afghanistan. I think this attack and occupation was, unnecessary. It was immoral. It was illegal, and I would say it was even criminal. But then to go ahead and punish a whole nation of 34, 35 million people for 20 years relentlessly for the crime of, say, a group of people who were not Afghans and had nothing to do with it is itself very problematic.
Yes.
And so the United States in the last 20 years, as we all know, spent about $2 trillion on the war, but also gave the Afghan puppet regimes of Mr. Karzai and Mr. Ghani, $150 billion to, nation building. But right now, we all know, whether you listen to Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, or the head of the UNHCR, or anybody, listen to anybody, WHO or FOA, the European Union, the conference of the 20 G20 people, the G7, no matter who you listen to, and a lot of these people have gone and visited Afghanistan, and I am in touch with former students and colleagues, relatives, nephews and nieces. There's no money in Afghanistan right now. There's no food, there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no work, there are no payments, and there's hardly any government. And everyone keeps telling us, that the country is in deep, deep crisis, where, most of the people right now are hungry. And in fact, by the end of the year, they say 97% of the population will be near starvation. And this is not an exaggeration, I think it's true, because the puppet regimes who were installed by the United States, both Mr. Karzai and Mr. Ghani, did very little work. And all they did was to sort of enrich themselves, and serve foreign interests. And at one point, as you know, there were soldiers from 40 different countries, 150,000 foreign soldiers, beating up on a country like the size of Texas, which itself, I think, criminal. Anyway, so the United States, in other words, it owned the country for the last 20 years. It managed it. It knew everything about it. And on August 15th, I think August 15th is very important because at Doha, the Taliban representatives and the American government and other countries came to the conclusion early in August, or in July, I should say, this last July, that there was to be an interim government in Afghanistan without Mr. Ghani, and that the Taliban would eventually move in and take over and then we would go from there. Mr. Ghani had signed on to this, that there was to be an interim government around mid-August, and that he was to leave and the Taliban would come. So, yet on broad daylight, on August 15th, he and about 52 of his cronies, the so-called the Presidency of Four, Mr. Ghani, his wife Rola, and his national security assistants, Mr. Moheb, and also his chief of staff, Mr. Fazli. These four people were called a Presidency of Four. In other words, four of them ran the country.
Right.
So they get, and they take all the cash. First, they distributed the cash, took out all of the foreign currency from the Afghanistan bank and distributed it all over. And then whatever was left, they took the money in the helicopters. And Cigar, as you know, has been asked by Congress to investigate the theft.
Yes.
So he left in broad daylight in 3 helicopters at a time when Americans controlled the skies of Afghanistan.
Right.
And yet nothing was said by the Americans to either land the helicopter, not let him out, or, but anyway. So he goes away first to Tajikistan, then Uzbekistan, and then to Dubai. So the question now is, how is it that 20 years, of massive international involvement, military, economic, political, social, culture in every way, and yet the people are on the brink of starvation right now?
Right.
This is a very important question. It's a good question. And I would say this was deliberate by the United States and its allies. So there we are. But we can't allow this to continue because it's getting very cold in Afghanistan.
Right.
There will soon be snow in the northern part of the country where there will be no transportation and communication. And right now, as you know, people, foreigners, whether they were heads of states or the G7, the G20, or the recent 2 days ago conference between the Taliban representatives and also the CIA, the USAID, and the State Department representatives. Both sides said, that we had frank and honest and good discussion, professional discussion. That's how the Americans put it. Mm-hmm. Right now, as you know, as I said, there's hardly any government because the Taliban were not prepared to move in and take power and govern.
Right.
This was to happen gradually and slowly and systematically. But when the Ghani people left, Karzai, Hekmatyar, and Mr. Abdullah called the Taliban to please come into Kabul and control the city because things were getting out of hand. So in the absence of no government, the world is saying something needs to be done about the people. I know for a while, the whole world was especially the corporate media, from CNN to ABC to sometimes even PBS, they were all so concerned with the evacuation, which was done prematurely and very poorly and stupidly.
Right.
I believe that if he had given that task to high school students, they probably would have done a better job.
Yes.
I have to say this right now, that during that evacuation, people got here with no papers whatsoever. No passports, no national ID cards, no excuse, no stamps, no nothing, because they found a hidden entrance to the Kabul airport and entered. The people discovered that and entered and got on the plane by force. So now we have in America Afghans of all types, not just the ones who collaborated with the occupation force, but also Afghans who shouldn't be here and had no right. But such is life. So now, first they were concerned with, how people, the airport, and then, now we're supposed to take care of these people, but hardly anyone is talking about, mass media in particular is talking about, the 34 million Afghans who are left with nothing. As I said, there's hardly nothing. I don't know if you saw the Frontline special last night. It was an excellent,
I
nice
need to see
Frontline for an hour. I usually like their show. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I don't know if I should go on or let Marie talk for a minute.
Well, I'm enjoying listening to you talk, and one of the things that I was thinking about, with the idea of transparency and with the people who are left in Afghanistan, the United States has also denied access to Afghanistan, for the Afghani people to have access to their own funds. So their bank accounts are being blocked, and then they're still having to negotiate about giving humanitarian aid on top of that. It's just the originators of the chaos being the United States government, continuing that chaos and destruction and absolute devastation. So the humanitarian crisis is only going to exponentially increase, and we're going to see, we would hope to avoid it, but realistically there's going to be as much of a problems with feeding children and starvation as we've seen in Yemen. And again, the United States government bears a lot of that responsibility. But the accountability is not there.
At all.
And just ignored.
At all.
I agree.
And one of
yes, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, two things, just very briefly. One, about the Ahmadi family, and that there has still been that the people who were, that 10 innocent people killed, 7 of them children, 6 of them under 12 and under. The brutal killing there, that was a mistake, and we had the rare acknowledgement that they made a mistake, and yet the family has not gotten an apology. They have not gotten any help, any funds, or anything else. That's the one thing I would bring up. And the other thing I would bring up is, our friends in Afghanistan. And I think you won't be surprised, since we've been very well associated with Voices for Creative Nonviolence.
Yes, with
associated with Kathy Kelly. Yes, and I was in Afghanistan just very briefly in 2018 in September, and experienced the wonder of made and solidified relationships with children and youth that I'd been working with since 2010. And so they are in, when we think, so we are so concerned about what's going on. And as I know, for you, all the people that all the people that you love there, how, so when we look at the situation, where do you see, what are some of the things that people watching should know, and ways of moving the needle here?
There are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of thoughtful people, as in this country and around the world. I think we should really listen to what Angela Merkel said at the G20 meeting 2 days ago. And she said, we can't punish the whole nation, the 34 million people, for the mistakes or the misbehavior of a handful. Mr. Imran Khan of Pakistan also said that we need to engage the Taliban and try to work with them. And Mr. Gutierrez is saying, I don't want to read his extensive quote, I would have loved to, but what he said the other day to the G20 people, which was attended by President Biden, incidentally too, and many heads of states, other than China and Russia, who sent their foreign ministers. So what all of them are saying is that, the Taliban we may not like them, and the president of Turkmenistan actually said that, this is a new situation. We have to abandon older ideas, ideologies, perceptions, and misconceptions, and what we think about other people, whether they agree with us or not agree with us, etc. The foreign minister of Qatar, who went to Kabul, said the same thing, saying we may not agree with the Taliban. And later I would like to outline some of the things that we should do, but that we need to do something urgent about the 34 million people who are stranded there and who are being subjected to all kinds of sanctions, threats and psychological warfare, etc. You pointed out, Vicki, the attack on the family of Ahmadi the day after, on the 16th,
Right.
which shows that drones are not very smart all the time. They can't tell the difference between, a bomb and a bucket of water, and they can't tell the difference between a sheep and a baby.
Right.
Mr. McKenzie, General McKenzie, apologized later after the bombing, the mistake or the attack or the crime was revealed or exposed by the media. Then Mr. McKenzie said, yes, this was a mistake, but no compensation has been paid. But think about, hundreds of thousands of Afghans over the last 20 years, hundreds of thousands of Afghans were killed in one way or another through direct bombing. As you know, the United States dropped 80,000 bombs on Afghanistan, including the so-called mother of all bombs.
Right.
So the air has been poisoned. The country is terribly polluted. Hundreds of thousands died. People died of sickness, of malnutrition, etc. We're losing a generation of children because they're warning us that, millions of children are malnourished right now and are on the verge on famine. So there's no question that the country is in a deep crisis. It's a catastrophe. It's a disaster.
Absolutely.
And a thinker from a think tank in Qatar, Mr. Barakat, makes some very interesting points. He's saying a couple of things, and I'll just outline these. That both sides, first, the world has to accept the fact that there's a new reality. This is what Mr. Putin said. That there's a new reality in Afghanistan, whether we like it or not, we agree with them or not, they do well or not, but it's a new reality, and they fought for 20 years, they took power, they control the country right now.
Right.
And we have to deal with that, but also that we have to separate the governing body, the Taliban, from the vast majority of the people.
Right.
The people may not like them either very much, although if they didn't like them, they would rise up. And they didn't, obviously. They're not rising except for demonstrations here and there. So Mr. Barakat is saying that both sides, the world has expectations for the Taliban, and the Taliban has certain desires, needs, and expectations, that both sides should make their positions and their expectations clear. And that the Taliban should give up their instinctive anti-Western feelings and ideas and ideologies. And that we should set clear targets, like we want everyone to have water, we want everyone to have one meal at least a day, or we want government employees to be paid, or we want schools to be open, etc. Make specific targets. And that we should make our positions clear, and we should not use our own ideologies, ideas, and agendas as a weapon to pressure the Taliban or to pressure the nation as a whole. And that there should be transparency, accountability, and fairness in the distribution of aid. And Mr. Guterres said, that we should set up a trust fund. I've been talking about this for months now, that we should set up an independent trust fund, a development fund, and an aid fund, and a peace corps, so to speak, peace force. That trust fund money should be managed by that trust fund. Money should not be given to Taliban directly, but aid, any kind of aid, whether it's cash, food, medicine, books, etc., should be gotten to the people directly. And that we should that we are facing a different reality in Taliban, that they're different from other post-conflict situations. These people are unique. They may be exotic. They may be medieval in some ways, but that's what we have, and we have to deal with them.
Right.
And that the world should help. Tamina?
You're still with us.
Yes.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're still here. Everything's good.
Egypt, yeah. Yes. Sign up. Whoa. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear and see you.
I'm sorry. Okay, Tamina is setting it up, and that we should
Just to make sure that you can see and hear us also.
try to. There are organizations and structures in place in Afghanistan. They may not be very effective, efficient, or smart, but there are like there's a government, there are schools, there are universities, there's a healthcare system, there are organizations, and Barakat is saying that we should work with these organizations, build on them, and help them, guide them instead of replacing them. In other words, do not bring in armies and armies of foreigners, try to do things for Afghanistan.
That would be my question when you say we should work on that, or is that the United Nations saying that, or is it a civil society to civil society support?
The civil society also.
Right.
And there are civil organizations, men, women, children, professors, school teachers, government employees, labor unions. I mean, these people they're sort of rudimentary, but the foundations are there.
Okay.
And that we should build on these and try to work with them and form them. And that the outsiders should know that there are divisions amongst Taliban. I don't know if you know this, but there are extremists amongst the Taliban. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Defense, who is the son of Mullah Omar, Mr. Yaqub, he's the Minister of Defense now, and he issued a decree saying no Talib should behave in a way that alienates the population or defames the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And then about 3 days ago, there was a big ministerial meeting amongst the Taliban leadership for 6 hours from 8 to 2 in the morning, and said, we must purge our ranks from undesirable elements. This is their language. By which they mean, the Taliban leadership, they even have the Haqqani brother, the Minister of Interior, the Minister of, one other minister, I think, I forget which one it is, but 3 or 4 of the Haqqani brother who were notorious. I mean, they have, a bounty on their head by the U.S. government. And I think what the Taliban were saying, the moderates, the cluster moderate leadership, thinks one way about what they would like to accomplish, and then there are some extremist radicals, including some of the Taliban who are now defecting to the Daesh. There are witnesses of Daesh, as we know. They have done attacks. The most recent one was on the mosque in Kunduz in Khanabad, killing about 80 people. And so the Taliban, the Ministerial Council 3 days ago said, we must purge our ranks from all of the undesirables and people who do not follow our policies, people who alienate or mistreat the population. And the other thing is that other governments, the Taliban needs to understand that other governments cannot recognize and accept the Taliban outright, because other governments like the U.S. or Britain or Germany or Japan, they're under pressure from their own populations. If the Taliban mistreat the women, for example, or are not clear about certain things, that the Taliban should be patient, because other governments also need time to sort of deal with these issues and convince their populations that, perhaps the Taliban are to be accepted and dealt with. And Barakat saying that the best way to establish communication, genuine dialogue and communication between the Taliban and the outside world, is to work through the education, healthcare, and agriculture. These 3 areas they don't have to be politicized or political, and they can establish grounds for dialogue between the Taliban and others. And that all sides need to sort of be patient, and but engage each other. And also that we should establish a council or of consultants Mr. Barakat is suggesting that we should establish a council of consultants, preferably, quote, respectable and educated Afghans from their diaspora, including some non-Afghans.
Right.
And then we should go from health, education, agriculture, and food, and employment to other areas of life. So these are the areas. And then finally, I want to briefly say what George Kennan, many of you know, said many years ago about foreign policy. And this is addressed toward Washington and other capitals, that foreign policy should recognize or adopt or follow four principles. One is maintaining proper distance with the other. Mm-hmm. 2, mutual respect. Mm-hmm. And 3, non-interference. 4, the avoidance of war. I think the outside world needs, again, to accept the Taliban, help them, guide them, engage them, talk to them, mentor them, and monitor them, and hold them accountable. I think we need to do that. And I'm sorry, I want to pause and let you talk.
Well, you have so many wonderful ideas, and I can't help as I'm hearing them thinking, and I won't go very far with this, but 20 years of missed opportunity. So 20 years where the U.S. government or the people who came, could have, if it wasn't just a big military maneuver, they could have been building something. They could have been helping something, or they could have been not. It's about being a resource and working with the people's needs and preferences and having some idea what they are. So that opportunity for listening, for communication and cooperation, which is really what we're still talking about, right? For communication and cooperation are needed, and especially if the innocent people are not going to be suffering more, and they've already suffered so much.
Yes. Well, from 2002, early 2002, after the Taliban were evicted from power, I was asked to go and help. Mm-hmm. So from 2002 until October 2019, I spent more than half of my time in Afghanistan. I went every year. Mm-hmm. And I met, I have to say, generals, ambassadors, ministers, etc. And I saw things from very close by. The emphasis throughout was actually on winning hearts and minds, and also on so-called stabilization, not on development. For example, from day one to this moment, Afghanistan imports 80% of its electricity. When there is electricity, 80%. But the country's water goes outside to Pakistan and to Iran. Afghanistan has so many rivers, fast rivers, that we could produce enough electricity that could export it to Central Asia and India and Pakistan. But still, this moment, 80% of the electricity is imported from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and 20% produced domestically because no work was done. Here is a country where 75% of the people live on agriculture, and it's hungry right now. There's not even enough staple diet. So this gives you an example. Schools, the military was a fiasco, because the emphasis again was not on development, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, but on, quote, stabilizing the situation politically and also winning hearts and minds, and nothing happened. Neither development nor stabilization, not winning hearts and minds.
Certainly not the winning hearts and minds, especially with the drones and the night raids and things like that. And the drones especially very diabolical because you have terrorizing of whole communities when people don't know when is it going to happen? When is some mistake? Well, those very common mistakes, and all the research that says that for every one person they're aiming at who may or may not be guilty of anything,
Yes,
and may or may not be the person that they think it is, right? That 9 other innocent people will die.
Yes.
And then they think the same person, they killed them up to 7 times because they never knew which one it was.
Yes. Well, the last Jewish person, Mr. Zablov Simentov, who just left Afghanistan, actually went to Israel. You know what he said his parting shots were?
What?
He said he blamed the United States. And he told Israel in the war, he said, never trust the United States. Of course, what he meant was the United States government. There are reasons for this, as we know. There are deeper reasons other than the United States, retaliating because Mr. Bush wanted to be Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Condi Rice, Wolfowitz, etc. These people wanted to show. And Mr. Khalilzad, I have to say, Khalilzad shares the blame because he was the one who refused to negotiate, or the Bush administration refused with the Taliban about bin Laden. The Taliban wanted to deal with that issues, through law, through investigation, through police work. But Washington said no. And also, they were the ones who excluded Taliban from the so-called Bonn Conference in December of 2001, the major conference that shaped Afghanistan's political system and installed Mr. Karzai. I just spoke 2 days ago to a good friend, Mr. Dr. Abdul Sattar Sirat, who lives in San Diego. He was the one who won 3 rounds of riots in December of 2001 in Bonn, but they refused to recognize him or accept him as a president because he is Uzbek. And Mr. Tenet, George Tenet, the head of the CIA, then said, I know a good Pashtun who is Mr. Karzai. And they made this man who was not fit at all. Anything. They made him president and he lasted for 15 years. The same thing happened with the fraudulent elections of Mr. Ghani. Both of these people were illegal, illegitimate, ineffective, inefficient, and, not presidential. So
this is
people say, this is not a mistake. I mean, there's a school of thought, they would say this has a lot to do with the exertion of American supremacy,
right?
White supremacy, American supremacy, American hegemony, the new imperialism, colonialism, some Islamophobia.
The project,
a good amount of Islamophobia. But this is a pattern that we've done, that the United States government has done all over Central and Latin America for decades, and it's just new continents to try it out on in Asia as well.
Yes.
They continually pick losers, and for their puppet regimes, and this is the result. It is the imperialism that they just go in and extract what they can. They make the money that they can, and goodbye.
Yes, and try to serve their strategic interests.
Exactly.
I have been to Nicaragua 4 times during the Sandinistas. Mm-hmm. First time in 1979, July 1979, and then subsequent 81 days. I saw what the United States did to Nicaragua, just like Cuba, Chile, Venezuela, etc. Right now, as you know, we are bombing. The United States is bombing Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Niger, and other places. So people would say this is deliberate. It has to do with maintaining the hegemony of the developed nations in the north to subdue and make and deliberately underdevelop the nations of the south, especially resource nations. Unless something has happened to the global international political economy. So one reason is ideological, of course, and American supremacy at all costs and any cost. The other, of course, is we have to recognize the role of the military-industrial intelligence complex. Who benefited?
Yes.
The real beneficiaries are the military-industrial intelligence conflict, and I would say part of the media too, the corporate media.
Absolutely.
Sure.
The money is, this $2 trillion, it came back. It came back here. You probably read about the story of this Afghan who was the son of the minister, Mr. Hamid Wardak, recently, who bought a villa in Miami for $20 million
Right.
because he was the contractor. His father was Minister of Defense War for several years during the Karzai administration. This man had a lobby here. His son Ahmed and his brother, they had a lobby here actually to perpetuate the war. This is an Afghan living in Virginia.
Right.
And so now he's able to buy, for example, in addition to his $5 million condominium in Miami, he buys a $21 million house.
Right.
And my house costs barely $350,000.
Right.
I have worked for 50 years, 50 years. Really hard.
Right,
I can't.
right,
So
right.
anyway, so there are other interests, you see, other than
Right.
the ruling class interests, and the interest of the developed nations is to keeping people in their place, unless we come up with a new, just, fair, and environmentally sound global political economy. I wanted to say, just if you give me a minute, please. So right now, I think what the United States needs is to release the money, the $10 billion Afghanistan money. That's not Taliban money or Karzai money or any money. That money should be released. That's why there's no money. There's no money there. So where's the money? The money is sitting in New York and in Washington. So release the money, but also the World Bank and the IMF should be allowed to unfreeze the funds that was to go to Afghanistan.
Right.
Injection of massive humanitarian aid, an end to all kinds of sanctions.
Yes.
We know sanctions hurt the people only.
Right, exactly.
Normalize relations with certain conditions. Pay Afghanistan reparation. I think the occupying nations should pay Afghanistan reparation, and not just this family that was incinerated.
No,
But all Afghans, the hundreds of thousands of people who lost sheep, cows, donkeys, horses, bicycles, etc.
And so many
and
people.
Also, reparation of stolen money. This money, like this young man who bought the $21 million villa, this is stolen money. That money should be repatriated. We should activate the Interpol, and also money stolen by Americans, Afghans, and Afghan Americans should all be repatriated. Convene tribunals, international tribunals to investigate war crimes by all people, wherever they were from and wherever they might be. Station a UN peacekeeping force, because I do worry about not only foreign intervention, but also conflict, ethnic conflict amongst the Afghans.
Absolutely.
It's a real danger. Afghanistan is a very divided society, and ethnicity and ethnic identity are never very far from the surface. This could erupt. So we need a UN peacekeeping force to keep stability and law and order. Stop meddling in Afghanistan affair in any way. Guarantee Afghanistan's independence, neutrality, territorial integrity and sovereignty, and so forth. And let the Taliban make their own mistakes for a while. I am a little leery about actually foreign groups, including women's organization, I have to say, putting pressure on the Taliban, because it could actually boomerang, it could sort of make them worse, and it could create more tension, even warfare. So the world should sort of cajole, engage, prompt, encourage, mentor, but not pressure the Taliban, because that could sort of backfire. And I would say close Guantanamo and all of the black sites everywhere in the world. We don't need Guantanamo and spending millions of dollars per person a year. Let the people and establish a truth commission, like the Afghanistan papers. This Afghanistan papers, how and why were we lied to? The whole world was lied to by the generals, State Department people, Afghan government officials, etc. This should be investigated, and people should be given fair treatment. And then, normalize the situation and relationships. So these are the things, I would like to see happen. Thank you.
It's a good list.
Yes.
I would really love to see the International Criminal Court be allowed to investigate.
Absolutely.
I know under the previous administration they were flat out told, you won't be allowed to land in the United States, or they threatened to invade The Hague, I believe.
Oh my God.
Bolton was quite and Pompeo were very boisterous
Sure.
about that and wanting to resist any kind of investigation into U.S. war crimes.
But Marie, that the recent decision was that the ICC would investigate not the United States; it would investigate our party. Yes, amazing.
And those investigations will lead back, right? So hopefully in time there will be enough support, or I don't know. I would like to see that. I've seen like citizen tribunals and things like that are done too.
Me too.
And so multiple times, the Bush administration and other members have been condemned by citizen tribunals for their war crimes. But I would
Bertrand Russell. Remember the war tribunals by Bertrand Russell?
Oh,
years ago.
Well, I remember the war crime tribunals for the St. Patrick's Four had a wonderful, and that was on the lead up to the war on Iraq. So
yes,
when they were,
too.
Actually Claire Grady was one of the St. Patrick's Four.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, but anyway, we are running short on time, so I because there is so much to talk about, so much to do, and we only have, I'd say we have, 8 minutes left or something like that. So,
sorry for speaking so much.
No. It's wonderful. I'm just glad that we have this all recorded. It will be on, it will be on WBNY. It will be on our YouTube channel, on the Western New York Peace Center YouTube channel.
Vicki Marie, I mean, for me, it's not some sort of intellectual, ideological, abstract issue. It's very real. And as I said, we're constantly getting calls. People cry on the phone.
Right.
People have nothing. There are people who have nothing to eat. Babies have nothing to eat. Men, women have nothing to eat. The situation is very murky. It's very uncertain. And a lot of people are suffering. It's very hard not to feel. It's very painful. As I said, it's very unnecessary, very dysfunctional, and very immoral. It hurts.
It's terrible. It is. And also, I've been getting contacted by people, these young people that we're talking about.
Yes,
so our young friends. So it is a very, very dire, very, very immediate. And I just want to call out the militarism of this country and the militarism that we have been, we are the greatest purveyors, we know that, of violence in the world, but then we only encourage more of the same by our very example. So, I mean, in Yemen, in Gaza, in so many places, but in Afghanistan, where we've been responsible for 20 years of brutalizing the people and now leaving them in such a state.
I think this is also a very good point, time to recognize that there are limits to military might. I think we have to face the realities. General Milley, everybody has said, even the President Biden, the United States was defeated. It lost the war.
Right.
Because there are limits to military might. It may work in certain areas. It certainly did not work in Vietnam, and did not work in Afghanistan. And the U.S. should learn a big lesson.
Absolutely.
And demilitarize our life, our culture, our foreign policy, our foreign relations.
Well, you're just helping me decide what we need for our next show on Talking Peace. But one of the things we're working on is sort of how to change that, how to stop the bombs that are going off in other places in the world from exploding over here because of unmet needs, and using resources for life-sustaining efforts and not for the war. I call it Fear Inc. All the efforts to intimidate, control, incarcerate, or kill. So they get all the money. All those efforts get the money, and then the health care, the agriculture, we get the leftovers. We have to beg, the education, So anyway, so I'm so glad that Marie's been taking notes, plus we have the recording, so I'll be writing up some notes. But we like to support all of those ideas that you have and try to get our Congress people, our decision makers at every level, all of those ideas that you have and try to get our allow the Congress people, our decision makers, to support all those ideas that you have and try to get our allow the Congress people, our decision makers, to support all those ideas that you have and try to get all those the money, the energy, the personnel, to support all those ideas that you have. So if we take all those the money, the energy, the personnel, to support all those ideas that you have. Right, so I'm taking all those the money, the energy, the personnel, you could reach out to million to so I'm taking all those the money, the energy, the personnel, you could reach out to million to so I'm taking all those the money, the energy, the personnel, you could reach out to million to so I'm taking what I do is the money, the energy, the personnel, what I do is the money, the energy, Absolutely. You are so right. Thank you so very much. Both of you, thank you so very much for such wisdom, for such such help and such a lot that we have to do together. So we have been talking peace, and we've been talking peace in truth and love.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zahir. So glad to be in touch with you. We will continue in touch and work together. And